Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Vanessa Mercado Taylor here, your instructor for Intro to Cinema. This lesson will focus on narrative. So take a moment to think about what you think narrative is. So what is narrative? A movie's narrative is the telling of its story, the events in a movie and how they connect to each other via cause and effect. Up until this point, you have probably thought about it as the story the film tells, but later in the lesson we will differentiate between plot and story. Narrative is form, something made, the product of deliberate decisions concerning content. Remember the sculpture of the human body? The artists made deliberate decisions to create their work of art and give it a certain mood and effect. Although each artist was working with the same content, the human body, their specific and unique approach and interpretation is what led to the final product. In the same way, filmmakers must make deliberate decisions about how the content is presented. So who creates the narrative? The screenwriter. Sometimes it's a story that the writer has pitched to the producer. Sometimes the screenwriter is hired to write a specific idea. And at other times, the director, him or herself, is the screenwriter. The most common type of narrative is a 5-part dramatic structure, which includes exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and denouement. Exposition is everything preceding and including the inciting incident. It provides the background information on the characters, setting, and basic conflict. It's the backstory, information about the past or information about characters. This section ends with the inciting incident. The inciting incident is what sets the main action in motion. In the movie Juno, for example, the inciting incident is Juno finding out she is pregnant. This is what sets the rest of the action for the movie in motion. Without this event, there would be no movie. Without the inciting incident, there would be no movie. After the exposition is the rising action. These are the events that lead up to the climax. The climax is the turning point in the story, the moment where the main character must make a choice that will change everything. It is the moment of highest intensity and intrigue. During the climax, the main plot line is resolved. The events that follow the climax are called falling action. These events lead to the denouement, the resolution or conclusion. In order to begin talking about film, you must first understand 2 very important categories: diegetic elements and non-diegetic elements. A diegetic element is anything that the audience sees and hears that the characters also see and hear. They belong to the world of the film. A non-diegetic element is anything that the audience sees and hears that the characters do not see and hear. For example, if we see a woman in a room and we hear a doorbell, she answers the door. That doorbell sound is diegetic sound because it is in her world. She heard it. Now, if she has headphones on but doesn't hear it, it's still diegetic because it belongs to the world of the film. Now, if we see that same woman and then hear a really ominous underscoring music, that is non-diegetic. It's not like all of a sudden her room was pumping in this sound. It doesn't belong in the world of the film. It cannot be heard or seen by the characters. It's time to talk about story and plot, 2 words that are often used interchangeably but actually mean 2 very different things in film. Story is all the events that are presented on the screen in the order that they occurred. It also includes the events that are implicitly presented, events that we know happened but weren't shown. How many movies have you seen that don't go in chronological order? Most films don't show the story exactly how it would have happened chronologically. Filmmakers make choices about how to present the events to make it more interesting. That's the art of filmmaking. So we have to understand the difference between the story and the story as it's presented to the audience, which is the plot. Plot is the structure of the events. It is not how they happened chronologically. It is all the diegetic and non-diegetic elements in the order that they are seen in the film. We include the non-diegetic elements because they were crafted by the filmmaker to help tell the story. Okay, so you might still be a bit confused, so let's put it into practice. Let's look at the film Batman. If I asked you to describe the story of Batman, you would start at the very beginning, when Bruce's parents are killed, and then move through the events in the order that they occurred until the end of the story, not the film. If I asked you to describe the plot of Batman, you would describe the diegetic and non-diegetic elements of the movie in the order that we see them. So you would begin by talking about the title card, the credits, maybe the first thing you see or hear, until the end of the film. So for the plot, you look only at the narrative in the movie. For the story, you might be talking about events that are never seen in the film, but that are central to understanding the narrative. As with everything we cover in this class, this takes some time to process and understand. Make sure that if you are unclear, you write down questions that we can address in class or via email. The relationship between story and plot. Filmmakers must understand what story is being told before going through the difficult job of selecting events to show on screen and determining the order in which they will be presented. For viewers, the story is an abstraction, a construct that we piece together as the elements of the plot unfold before us on the screen. And our impressions about the story often shift and adjust throughout the movie as more of the plot is revealed. Now we will learn about the elements of narrative. These include order, events, suspense and surprise, repetition, narration, setting, scope, and characters. Bringing order to the plot of events is one of the most fundamental decisions that filmmakers make about relaying story information through plot. Plot order can be manipulated so that events are presented in non-chronological sequences that emphasize importance or meaning, or that establish desired expectations in audiences. Once you understand the order of the story, then you must ask yourself why the filmmaker chose the particular plot order that they did. Remember that the story order is how the events happened chronologically, and the plot order is how the events are presented to the audience. So what exactly is an event? It's very simple. It's a moment in the plot that tells the story. Some events are more important than others in film. Let's look first at major events. A major event is a moment in film that forces the characters to choose between two or more different paths. For example, in the movie Gladiator, there are three major events. Maximus moving from general to slave. Secondly, when he moves from slave to gladiator. And finally, when he moves from gladiator to savior. Minor events are those that add texture and complexity, but are not essential elements within the narrative. They do not contribute to the major conflict or major plot line. Every film has a main plot and several minor plots. Differentiating between the two is important in analysis. An example of minor events in Gladiator would be the scenes which explore the love that Lucilla has long felt for Maximus, but because he has other, more important things to worry about, he is not forced to make a decision about this. He's too busy dealing with the major events. When you describe the story or plot, you must identify every major event in the film, and it helps your analysis to include minor events. There are many moments in film which create tension or contradict audience expectations. There are two different kinds, moments of surprise and moments of suspense. Let's look at the difference. Suspense versus surprise. These two are not the same. Surprise is being taken unaware and can happen only once. It can be a shock, and our response to it is short-lived. It is one event. For example, the "I see dead people" moment in The Sixth Sense is a moment of surprise. Suspense, however, is more drawn out. It is the anxiety brought on by a partial uncertainty. It is comprised of a series of events. Many of the scenes from The Shining are suspense. Think of most horror movies. They employ suspense regularly, particularly through music. No other element can help you analyze a film more than repetition. If an event occurs more than once in the plot, then this suggests more importance. Like order, it serves as a means of relaying not just story information, but also as a signal that a particular event has meaning or significance. Story events can be repeated in various ways. For example, a character may remember a key event at several times during the film in different ways. A character might repeat a line or words throughout the film in order to help communicate the theme or message or character development. A filmmaker may show an image again and again. The familiar image is any image, audio or visual, that a director periodically repeats in a film. Some familiar images are symbols, where a material object represents something abstract. In Pedro Almodóvar's film Volver, we see frequent shots of wind turbines as a symbol meaning revolution or a returning to something. In The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, he repeats phrases like "nothing lasts" or "nothing stays perfect forever" to help communicate the theme of mortality. Let's look at narration, which is not to be confused with narrative. Narration means telling of the story, but we focus on the point of view in which the story is being told. Narration is looking at the camera itself as a narrator. There are two different types of narration: omniscient and restricted. Omniscient narration is giving us a third-person view of all the aspects of the movie's actions or characters. We get information that the characters do not even have. For example, if there's a knock on the door and the character says, "Who is it?" and the camera shows us who is behind the door, then it is omniscient, because we know who's behind the door and the character does not. We're being given information that the character does not have. Restricted narration only reveals information to the audience as specific characters learn of it. For example, if we see a woman in an apartment and there's a knock on the door, we don't see on camera who it is until she opens the door and she sees the person. That's restricted narration. Some movies use actual narrators to help tell the story, a voice that is giving us story or character information. There are three types of narrators: first person, which is an actual character in the film; voiceover, which is a person who is not a character; and direct address, which is when a character in the movie directly addresses the camera. Setting is the time and place in which the story occurs. It reveals not only the date, city, or country, but also the character's social, educational, and cultural background. It can also reveal the character's states of minds, or emphasize themes. For example, in Days of Heaven, the wide open space of the West emphasizes the loneliness and alienation of the characters. The setting is never a coincidence. It is a choice that the screenwriter and director have made, so it has meaning. As you watch a film, ask yourself, why this setting? What meaning does it add to the story or characters? Scope is the overall range in time and place of the movie's story. Stories can range from the distant past to the narrative present. For example, Cloud Atlas, which follows various characters through thousands of years. Or they can be narrowly focused on a short period, even a matter of moments. For example, in the film Time Lapse, we follow three friends for a few weeks in the same apartment building. Films can take us from one galaxy to another, or they can remain in a single room. They can present rather limited perspectives on their world, or they can show us several alternative perspectives. Scope is the size of the story being told. A biopic, which is a film about a person's life, can tell the story through one significant episode or period in the life of a person, or through a series of events in an entire life. For example, Benjamin Button tells the story of the main character's entire life. American Beauty tells the story of the main character's life through only the last few weeks of his life. A war film can be limited in scope to the story of a single battle, or large in scope to include an entire war. They can be about an intimate personal story or about an entire group of soldiers. The next element we will look at is character. Now don't confuse character with actor. The actor is the person in real life who is playing the character in the story. Characters have discernible traits, habits, and dispositions. In order to understand and analyze narrative, you must understand and analyze the characters, their journey, their choices, most importantly, their actions. They are a formal element that helps to develop the narrative. There are different types of characters. We can discuss characters in terms of the complexity of their traits or their importance within the narrative. First, we will discuss characters by the complexity of their traits. Round characters, complex and three-dimensional. They possess several traits, sometimes even contradictory ones. They are lifelike and believable, unpredictable, and capable of surprising us in convincing ways. Flat characters are one-dimensional and have one or few discernible traits. Their motivations and actions are generally predictable. Now we will look at characters by their importance within the narrative. Major characters are the most important to the plot. They make the most things happen or have the most things happen to them. Minor characters play a less important role. Marginal characters lack definition and are on screen for a very short period of time. The two major characters that you should focus on are the protagonist and the antagonist. The protagonist is the central figure of the story. It's who the story is about. The antagonist is the character opposing the protagonist, and in all likelihood, the one who provokes the protagonist's actions or reactions. This concludes our lesson on narrative. Make sure that you go back and review anything that seems confusing and that you have taken good notes so that you can apply this knowledge to your analysis of film in class.